Today we're talking about the Zhiyun Crane 2 and if this is a gimbal you should consider. So right off the bat, one of the biggest things that makes this gimbal stand out is the focus wheel. So you have a built-in focus wheel in the handle of the gimbal, which makes a huge difference when you're working with other gimbals. I've worked with a ton of gimbals and I've done a bunch of reviews on this channel. And out of all of them, this is the only one that I've worked with that has the focus wheel directly built into the handle. And this goes to a motor that you attach just by a cable that goes right into the gimbal itself. And you can use this follow focus wheel to control the focus. And it just makes such a difference when you're shooting on longer lenses, say a 50mm or like a 35mm, and you want to shoot shallow depth of field. Having the focus wheel makes a huge difference. Now there are a few things to consider when working with a focus wheel because you are going to need probably some more gear to make it work. You're going to need a bigger setup. But before we get into more details about this gimbal, let's just watch some footage because one of the most important things about a gimbal is it smooth? Does it get good footage? Because if you can't get good footage with this gimbal, then all the little features and bells and whistles don't matter at all. So here's some footage that I've been getting using the Zhiyun Crane 2. So I'd have to say, in my experience of working with gimbals, I would say that this gimbal does work very well. And there's a few things that I want to point out about the gimbal itself that really make it stand out compared to some other gimbals. I already talked about the focus wheel. That's huge. Now, before we get into some of the other features, you have to realize that when you're working with a focus wheel, you might need an external monitor to be put on the gimbal somewhere, because you're dealing with critical focus, so you want to make sure that everything's in focus. And if you're going off your tiny screen on your camera, you're not necessarily going to be able to judge your focus. So you might need to add a bigger monitor, a 5 or a 7-inch, depending on what kind of rig you're trying to build out. Well, once you do that, you add the motor, you add the monitor, you add everything on the gimbal with the cables and everything, it starts getting really heavy. So that's just something to keep in mind, something to consider. If you need a lighter setup or you're doing longer takes, then a full built-out gimbal might not be the way to go. Now, you can get 2 handles for this gimbal. Zhiyun has an attachment that allows you to add 2 handles, and that will take the load off so you can put more weight on it. Run and gun with a one-handed gimbal with a ton of weight does get exhausting after time. You could do short takes, but if you're running around all day, your one arm is gonna become like Popeye. Now, like I was saying, when you're using the one-handed grip and you put the motor on and you have everything attached, this does become a heavy gimbal. Now, the way to alleviate that is use the two-handed mode. So you can get this additional accessory that makes it a two-handed gimbal, and it works well. This is how I've been operating this gimbal because it makes it a lot easier to do shoots with the 2 hands. It takes the load off, so you're not just running around one hand trying to carry this whole thing. And I'm only working with the GH5. If you have a bigger camera, I can imagine this gets very heavy very quick. So if you're gonna be doing longer takes, if you're gonna be going for a while, the two-handed is definitely the way to go. Now with this, if you still want access to the focus control, you can put your one hand in the center, one hand on the outside grip, and now use your thumb to use the focus control. So you can still use this two-handed. It allows you to take some of the weight off allow you to control a little bit and still use the focus control. So a few other things that really stand out for me with this gimbal is that first, it's simple. Like there's not a ton of buttons, there's not a bunch of things you have to do to get to the menus, to get to the modes, all that good stuff. On the front of your gimbal, you have your mode button, you have your record button, you have your joystick, which allows you to point the camera in any direction that you want. That's important. I really like using those. And then at the bottom, you have another wheel. Now this is something I really like about this crane. You have a menu system built into the handle of the gimbal. So you actually can go in and make changes to different settings on the gimbal just right here from the handle. So you're not dealing with an app. Now there is an app attached to it, like all these gimbals now, every gimbal has an app attached, and you can control your motors. That's where you can do your time lapses, all that good stuff. But having more options on the handle itself makes it an easier gimbal to use when you're out in the field, because you don't necessarily want to always connect your phone whenever you're out shooting. Personally, I don't want to have my phone on me when I'm shooting if I don't have to. So having a bunch of my controls and my menus right here on the gimbal makes a huge difference. So what I can do is make sure that my settings are dialed in, make sure my gimbal motors are set to where I like them, and then when I get out there for my shoot, I only have to do minor tweaks on the gimbal itself. Especially if I'm using the motor and the bigger payload overall, I'm not going to want to fumble with my phone and doing some other things. I'm just going to want to focus on getting good footage, and that's the most important part. So one thing personally that I really hope to see in the next version of the crane is the slant design in the back. This gimbal is not the slanted design, and more gimbals are coming out with the slanted design, which makes it easier to see the screen on the back of your camera. Now I use the GH5, which I can flip out the screen, but when I'm running with a gimbal, I don't particularly like to flip out the screen. And for anyone out there that's using a camera that doesn't have a flip out screen, having the motor directly in the back makes it so you can't see the image as well. And once you start working with the slanted design gimbals, you realize that it makes a huge difference when you're out there shooting, just having that more freedom to shoot. So that's one thing about this gimbal that I don't particularly like, and I hope that they make it in the Crane 3. They have the slanted design because it does make a huge difference. Now it's got a lot of the different modes that you have in other gimbals, the follow, the lock, the roll, all that good stuff. It allows you to do time lapses, and it's just built well. This gimbal will last, you'll get lots of awesome footage if you decide to get the Crane 2. One thing is that this gimbal does feel bigger than some of the other gimbals that I've worked with. It has a bigger kind of design on it, but that's also because you can go up to 7 pounds on this gimbal. So you can hold some big cameras on here, which is great. If you have heavier cameras, if you're running like a big Canon with some heavier lenses, this gimbal is not gonna crash out on you. So guys, personally, I'm gonna continue to use the Crane 2, especially when I have those situations when I need a follow focus, because the follow focus does work so well on this gimbal. Now, if I'm running just a lighter setup, I might use a different gimbal that doesn't have all the bells and whistles. I think it's a solid gimbal, and I think it's a solid choice if you're looking for a gimbal with a follow focus. It all works well, it all connects easily. I've had no issues working with this gimbal, and it will get you awesome footage, which at the end of the day, that's the most important part. If you can get awesome footage, then the gimbal is worth it. All right guys, that is it. If you're new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. There's a lot of awesome filmmaking tutorials, some camera reviews. I also do a lot of traveling, love to make some adventure films. Also make sure you check out my creator film school. That's nuts to bolts, everything you need to know to have a career as a creator or a filmmaker. All right guys, that's it. I'll see you on the next one.